Inherited absolutely everything from my ex-husband's mother after I devoted countless hours caring for her. And now I find myself entangled in a legal nightmare as my ex and his mistress have begun threatening to take legal action. Hello everyone, I am in a very difficult situation and truly need to hear your honest opinions on what to do next. My name is Gigi, I'm 27 years old, and I have a precious 7-year-old daughter named Naomi. I was once married to my ex-husband Jack, who is 30, and our marriage spanned nearly 8 tumultuous years. When I was merely 2 months pregnant with our second child, I unexpectedly uncovered the painful truth that Jack had been unfaithful. He was having an affair with his coworker Suzanne, who is 28. I came across their intimate text messages on his phone quite by accident, and when I confronted him in tears, Jack reluctantly admitted that Suzanne was pregnant with his child too. The shock of his confession was so overwhelming that I nearly fainted, and from that moment, our home was filled with endless fights and heartache. Even though my ex-mother-in-law stepped in to care for me during that painful period, the relentless stress eventually led to a miscarriage, a loss so profound that it left me shattered. Instead of sharing in the grief or offering any comfort when we lost the child, Jack immediately abandoned the home to be with Suzanne, coldly blaming me for our loss. I was devastated and spent days in deep sorrow, yet I was blessed with the constant support of my ex-mother-in-law, who lovingly looked after Naomi so that I could grieve in some semblance of peace. Our divorce, which was bitter and fraught with conflict, saw Jack initially refusing to provide child support until the court eventually intervened and forced him to comply. Throughout the legal battle, it became painfully clear that Jack had absolutely no desire to remain involved in my life or in Naomi's life. He relinquished all custody rights to me, a decision that broke my heart as a mother, even though I was powerless to change it. All he ever managed to do was send a monthly child support payment, never once showing any interest in visiting or getting to know Naomi. Later on, I discovered that Suzanne had given birth to his son, and from that point forward, they have remained inseparable. Amidst all this chaos, my parents and my ex-mother-in-law were my unwavering pillars of support every single day. In fact, my ex-mother-in-law and my parents had shared an incredibly close friendship for many years, and it was through this very bond that Jack and I first met and eventually fell in love. When my ex-mother-in-law first learned about Jack's betrayal, she was absolutely livid with him and immediately took my side, offering every bit of support she could muster. She clashed vehemently with Jack over his affair, and solemnly vowed never to speak to him again once she found out he was leaving me. She made it crystal clear that she wanted absolutely nothing to do with his affair partner, or with the child resulting from that betrayal. As unbelievable as it may sound, my ex-mother-in-law stuck to her promise until the very day she passed away. She refused any reconciliation or even a simple conversation with Jack, even when he desperately pleaded for her presence alongside his son and Suzanne. Suzanne herself harbored deep-seated jealousy toward me and my daughter, as she was never truly accepted as part of the family by my ex-mother-in-law. When my ex-mother-in-law came to my side during my darkest hours, she faced an onslaught of criticism and backlash from her own family. Jack had lost his father some years before, and his relatives, attempting to mend broken ties, urged my ex-mother-in-law to forgive him by reminding her that Jack was her son, and that she should set aside the past to even visit his child. Yet, with steadfast determination, she refused those pleas. When Suzanne eventually gave birth to Jack's child, his relatives rallied around him without a second thought, even though they were well aware of his infidelity, and they made no effort whatsoever to check on me or my daughter. The situation deteriorated so badly that my ex-mother-in-law found herself deliberately excluded from family gatherings and celebrations, simply to make room for Jack's presence. Despite all this, she reassured me time and again that I was like her own child, and she did not mind if her relatives distanced themselves from her. I remain profoundly grateful for having such a loving and supportive woman as my mother-in-law, a rarity in these challenging times. As time went on, my ex-mother-in-law's health began to decline. She lost her ability to walk and take care of herself. Out of deep love and gratitude, I invited her to live with me permanently, vowing to provide round-the-clock care and support. We even hired a live-in nanny to help her during the mornings, while I personally dedicated countless hours in the evenings to ensure she was comfortable and well cared for. My daughter Naomi, who adored her grandmother, was absolutely thrilled to have her with us in our home. During her stay, my ex-mother-in-law confided in me about a deeply significant decision she had made when she first learned of Jack abandoning me. Initially, she had planned for everything to pass on to Jack, her only child, but upon discovering his sordid affair, she resolutely amended her will. In her revised plan, she entrusted the family home and her life insurance policy to Naomi, ensuring that my daughter would be provided for. Moreover, she included me in her will, bequeathing to me a substantial portion of her money along with a cherished family heirloom, a tangible symbol of trust and honor. Her heartfelt wish was for me to safeguard these treasures and eventually pass them on to Naomi when the time was right, creating a bridge that connected our family across generations. Jack, on the other hand, was set to inherit her car and his late father's entire art collection, with the funds to be held in trust for him until Naomi turned 18. Should I pass away, my parents would ensure that the money was managed properly. As she recounted every detail, a mixture of shock, deep gratitude, and a tinge of sorrow washed over me. Sorrow for the hardships we had endured, but gratitude that she had recognized them and had taken measures to secure Naomi's future. I repeatedly told my ex-mother-in-law that she could always revise her will again if she wished to include Suzanne or the child from the affair, but she was resolute. Despite our divorce, She only ever recognized me as her son's wife and firmly believed that Naomi was the rightful inheritor of her legacy. A decision I understood and accepted wholeheartedly. Throughout her stay with us, Jack never even called to inquire about her well-being. I would never have minded if he had taken a moment to check on her, but his indifference was unmistakable. Then, one day, when my ex-mother-in-law began experiencing severe breathing difficulties, I had to rush her to the hospital, gripped by fear that something terrible might happen. While my father stayed behind to care for Naomi, my mother, and I spent a long, anxious night at the hospital, praying fervently for her recovery. Thankfully, after a nerve-wracking night, she stabilized enough for us to bring her home. Determined that she should not leave this world without at least a brief moment of reconciliation with Jack, I called him, pleading with him to visit her despite our differences. I explained that her doctor had warned us about her fragile condition, and that time was running short. Instead of showing concern, Jack immediately began arguing about how his mother had never taken the trouble to form a relationship with Suzanne. I implored him to set aside his ego and prioritize his mother's well-being, but he obstinately insisted that his busy schedule left him with little time to spare. It was heartbreaking to witness his complete indifference in the face of his mother's vulnerability. Despite his initial reluctance, he eventually agreed to a brief visit. However, when he arrived, I was taken aback to see that he had brought Suzanne along with him. Although I was not thrilled at the idea of having her in my home, especially under these circumstances, I held my tongue for the sake of my ex-mother-in-law. The moment Jack laid eyes on his frail mother, the tension in the room was palpable. Their interaction was filled with long, awkward silences and stilted, forced conversation. Jack's behavior remained distant and formal, as if his visit was merely a perfunctory obligation rather than a heartfelt attempt to bridge the gap in their broken relationship. Disheartened by the lack of genuine connection, I found some solace in the fact that, at the very least, Jack had kept his promise to come. When my ex-mother-in-law noticed that Jack had arrived accompanied by Suzanne and their fair child, she began to protest, and I immediately reassured her that I was fine with whoever accompanied him, as long as he was there to provide some support. Unfortunately, my ex-mother-in-law's health continued its rapid decline, leaving her completely bedbound with very little she could do on her own. True to my promise, I maintained a respectful silence, even when Suzanne began to display excessive kindness towards her. On one occasion, when my ex-mother-in-law reiterated that she did not want to be around Darren, Suzanne reminded her in a somewhat patronizing tone that Darren was her grandchild as well. I stepped out of the room to give them some privacy and to check on Naomi, who looked visibly saddened and hurt by her father's complete lack of acknowledgement. Later, while I was in the kitchen, I caught sight of Suzanne stepping out into our backyard, engaged in a phone conversation. Her laughter, carried by the open window, revealed that she was complaining about being forced to visit Jack's ailing mother. She went on to say that Jack had told her his mother intended to leave everything behind for him, so the least they could do was visit her one final time. With an unsettling excitement, she also expressed her eagerness to move into the house and completely revamp it, lamenting that my ex-mother-in-law had absolutely no taste. As if that were not enough, she detailed her plans to remove every single picture of me and Naomi once Jack gained control of the property. I stood there, shocked and dismayed, struggling to comprehend the cruelty in her tone and the callousness of her intentions. It was at that moment that I realized with a sinking heart that Suzanne's interest in my ex-mother-in-law was not born out of genuine concern. Rather, it was solely motivated by her desire to secure her position in the inheritance. This horrifying revelation shattered my heart, as it became painfully clear that she cared far more about the potential fortune than about the well-being of a woman in her final days. I chose to keep this dreadful truth to myself, not wanting to burden my ex-mother-in-law further with harsh realities. Jack remained completely unaware that his mother had updated her well after his infidelity and our subsequent divorce. He had clung to the delusional belief that he would inherit everything, planning to pass it on to the child he had with Suzanne. I deliberately kept silent about this fact because it was not my place to reveal it, and frankly, if he couldn't even care for Naomi, he certainly didn't deserve any of it. Jack and Suzanne continued their visit, completely oblivious to the storm of revelations that lay beneath the surface. The entire situation was a bitter mixture of sorrow and a perverse sense of vindication. On one hand, I was mourning the inevitable loss of my beloved ex-mother-in-law, and on the other, I secretly anticipated the moment when Jack would finally be forced to face the reality of the updated will. The thought of that moment brought both a tinge of satisfaction and a deep sadness, for my ex-mother-in-law had been like a second mother to me. I knew she had reached her decision only after long and careful consideration, driven by a desire to ensure that Naomi, her granddaughter, would always feel loved and cherished, even when she was no longer there to offer the comfort. As her health declined, Jack never bothered to visit her again, and none of his relatives made any genuine effort to see her. Tragically, she passed away just last week. In the aftermath of my ex-mother-in-law's passing, I took it upon myself to arrange her funeral, determined to give her the dignified farewell she deserved despite the cold indifference of the rest of the family. My parents and I meticulously handled every detail, from choosing a beautiful casket to finding a serene venue that honored her memory. Notably, Suzanne did not even have the decency to attend the funeral alongside Jack, and although a few of his relatives were present, their lack of genuine concern was painfully obvious. Later, when her lawyer reached out to me regarding her will, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears streamed down my face as I learned that everything had been left to me, just as we had discussed. The conflicting waves of joy and sorrow washed over me as I grieved the loss of a cherished woman, while at the same time feeling immense gratitude knowing that I could now provide my daughter with every opportunity she deserved. No sooner had I begun to process these intense emotions than there came a sudden, insistent knock on my door. When I opened it, I was confronted by Jack, Suzanne, Darren, and several other relatives standing there with grim, unforgiving expressions. Jack immediately demanded that they come inside, and as they filed in, the tension in the room was almost unbearable. With a voice thick with anger and resentment, Jack demanded an explanation for the will, exclaiming, "Why did you get everything? My mother had a house, money, heirlooms, and you end up with it all?" His words cut through the silence like a knife. I struggled to remain composed, as I calmly explained that my ex-mother-in-law had carefully and deliberately made her decision. Jack then began accusing me of manipulating his mother during her bedridden state, insisting that I had unduly influenced her decision. I pointed out that the time stamp and date on her updated will clearly prove that the changes were made long before her health took a turn for the worse. Suzanne interjected in a tone laced with resentment, questioning why my daughter and I should receive everything when she and her son were, after all, family too. In response, I couldn't help but scoff, and it was then that I revealed, right there in front of everyone, the very words I had overheard Suzanne utter on the phone. Her eyes widened in shock as the reality of her own intentions became undeniably clear. Not only had she spoken candidly about her plans, but she had also betrayed every ounce of decency expected of her. Jack looked at her in utter disbelief, as the truth of Suzanne's motives became impossible to ignore. She tried to deny everything, accusing me of fabricating the details to sow discord within the family, but I firmly reminded everyone that it was Jack's own betrayal, cheating on me while still married, that had truly divided our family in the first place. The argument escalated rapidly as Jack's relatives joined in, expressing their bitter disappointment that they had received nothing from my ex-mother-in-law's estate. They argued that, as blood relatives, they were entitled to a share of her inheritance and even suggested that I sell the property and divide the money 8 ways. I was utterly shocked by their callous entitlement and made it abundantly clear that I was the only one who had been there to care for her during her final days, while none of them ever bothered to even visit. Their demands were not only unjustified but completely uncalled for, and I ultimately ordered them to leave my home, reminding them that they were more than welcome to review the will with her lawyer. But I was done with the discussion once and for all. Since that fateful day, I have continued to receive calls and messages from Jack, his voice filled with venom, as he repeatedly expressed his contempt for me. He insists that if I had any decency at all, I would hand over everything that, in his twisted view, rightfully belonged to his family instead of to me and Naomi. Am I truly the villain for refusing to yield to the demands of my ex-husband and his entitled family? Update 1. I initially thought this post would only reach a few people, but the overwhelming response has been incredible. Thank you all for listening, offering suggestions, and sharing your advice. For those who are angry at me for not insisting that my ex-mother-in-law include Jack's new child and Suzanne in her will, please understand that I did try, but ultimately, the decision was entirely hers, and I have no power to change that now. You may call me selfish, but I refuse to give up any part of the inheritance. I must put myself and my daughter first. I harbor deep resentment towards Jack and Suzanne, for not only did they break my heart, but their affair also played a significant role in causing my miscarriage. When I was already in a fragile state, Jack compounded my grief by abandoning me for Suzanne. My ex-mother-in-law made a conscious, well-thought-out decision to exclude both the affair child and Suzanne from her will. She had ample opportunity to change it if she wished, yet she did not. While I do feel a measure of pity for the affair child, I must emphasize that it is not my responsibility to shoulder their consequences. For clarity's sake, based on everything I know, my ex-mother-in-law's own childhood was devastated by her father's decision to prioritize his affair children, and it is perhaps this very experience that led her to disown Jack's actions. Jack, being the adult he is, clearly knew all of this yet chose to treat her so callously. Despite everything, my ex-mother-in-law left him his father's entire art collection, a fortune that will undoubtedly fetch him thousands of dollars, enabling him to care for Suzanne and their child quite well. Those who have taken to the comments would likely never be as calm and composed as I have been if they were in my shoes, and so I will absolutely not back down or yield to Jack's outrageous demands. Naomi is, after all, his daughter too, yet he has consistently shown more concern for his affair child than for her. He has never once taken on the role of a caring father, and thus, he does not deserve any part of what we have. Update 2. The tension between Jack and Suzanne continues to hang heavily in the air, their relentless demands and accusations only deepening the strain on my already fragile peace of mind. Just yesterday, out of the blue, Suzanne called me, a number I didn't even have saved, and from the very first word her tone was hostile. She began by accusing me of being nothing more than a greedy gold digger, claiming that I had stolen everything that should have belonged to them. She even said she was glad that Jack had left me following the miscarriage, asserting that I did not deserve to be his woman. At that moment, I was in the middle of work and found her aggressive tone both shocking and infuriating. I calmly explained that it was my ex-mother-in-law's own decision that had determined the fate of her estate, and that I had not manipulated any situation. However, Suzanne was having none of it. She continued to berate me, questioning my integrity and my right to anything at all. I firmly reminded her that she had never shared a genuine relationship with my ex-mother-in-law while she was still alive, so it was completely absurd for her to demand a share of what was rightfully not hers. Then, in a moment that crossed every imaginable line, Suzanne began threatening both me and my child, insisting that if I did not give Jack a portion of my inheritance, she would find a way to contact my daughter and expose the truth about me. That threat was absolutely unacceptable. I immediately warned her that involving my child was completely out of the question, and that if she ever came near Naomi, I would have no choice but to have her arrested. I reminded her that I already had evidence from multiple troubling text messages, and that obtaining a restraining order would be a swift process. I also made it clear that I could easily reverse the situation by contacting her employer with the same evidence. This ultimatum seemed to silence her momentarily, and I promptly ended the call. I then called Jack to inform him of what Suzanne had said, reiterating that if either of them dared contact my child again, they would face serious legal consequences. Jack, clearly taken aback, began apologizing on Suzanne's behalf, but I cut him off immediately. I told him flatly that I no longer cared for him or his excuses, that I was resolutely determined to claim what his mother had left for me, no matter how much he cried or pleaded. I warned him that any further attempts to contact me or my daughter would not be tolerated, and since that call, my phone has remained silent. I fully intend to stand by my words if either Suzanne or Jack ever dares to try and threaten us again. Update 3. It has now been 2 months since my last update, and I have received hundreds of requests for more details about my story. So here it is. We have moved into my ex-mother-in-law's home, and as we settle into this space filled with memories, I can't help but wish she were still here. I miss her presence in every room, the laughter we shared in the living room, the evenings she spent in the backyard, and the countless conversations we enjoyed in the kitchen. Her spirit lingers in every corner of the house, a constant reminder of the warmth and love she once radiated. Each day, I navigate a whirlwind of emotions. Gratitude for the inheritance that now safeguards Naomi's future, coupled with the profound sorrow of losing a woman who meant so much to both of us. Even in this loss, I find solace in knowing that the home she cherished will continue to serve as a sanctuary for Naomi, a lasting legacy of her love and care. I carry her spirit with me every day, grateful for the time we had together and determined to honor the legacy she left behind. Every word of this story is a testament to the trials, heartbreak, and resilience that have defined my journey. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story, and please continue to support me by subscribing, liking, and sharing this video.